Injustice for All, Q. How do you feel about that?
Okay, well, Injustice for All is actually one of my favorite albums by Metallica, if not my favorite. Besides the incredibly strong set list, just the song Injustice for All for me just really means a lot to me. Just, I guess because I felt that the hook that the song starts with really captures the sentiment of the track more than a lot of material, not only that Metallica's written, but has just, especially in rock at all, then or since. So, I mean, Metallica's always been a thematic band, but for some reason that I can't really explain, it really resonated with me, the entire album.
As a fan of all of their work, for the most part.
No, all of it. I found reasons to like all of Metallica's work.
I am a fan of all of their work. I just have to understand. And Justice for All is basically the symbolism of a closed fist, since it's so compressed and there's very few moments that are unrelentless on it. So besides that, what else in that album would stand out in comparison to a lot of their other stellar classics?
I felt like it made a lot of contributions to, I guess, what they called the metal, was it Kirk Hammett said, the metal lexicon. Like, a lot of the riffs and songs like Harvester of Sorrow, One, the soft and heaviness, Blackened, it's all stuff that has been used and reused, and they were huge pioneers of the genre, and I felt like this album in particular was especially influential in the long run.
Now, you mentioned those songs of a slower tempo. What about songs such as To Live Is To Die or Frayed Ends of Sanity, which I feel do, and Dyer's Eve, that do the opposite of what you mentioned, that don't have distinguished rock hooks, but are much almost 9-minute songs that are just riffs on riffs on riffs the entire time.
But they're great riffs.
But what do you feel about that in as a differently from the songs that you mentioned, which are much slower tempo and a constructed and classic song format, almost pop song format?
Yeah, I really liked, I appreciated that shift, and I guess it was kind of foretelling of where they would move as a group. But I appreciated, especially towards this point in the career, they were allowing input from other places in their group. And I felt like the difference, I guess the different flavors in the album really reflected on that. So like you mentioned, the slower songs versus the ones that I kind of mentioned as favorites, that is maybe a bias of mine that I should work on. But I don't really have an opinion, honestly. I'm clearly rambling.
Because when it comes to albums like that, with their albums, you have to view them. Well, the first 5 are actually, now looking back, the first 7 are milestones to the rock and metal community. So when
people are gonna feel some kind of way about you putting 7 up there.
7? Ask Nickelback now about Load and Reload and Creed. Where do you think that sound came out of?
I think that sound came out of their pure ingenuity and drop D.
Anywho, when it comes to that album written about after Cliff Burton's death and not hearing any bass on it, what do you feel about how that album? The biggest thing about that album to most people is how it was mixed, as opposed to even some of the songs that gets usually overshadowed. How do you feel about that?
I feel like, I mean, symbolism aside, I feel like perhaps that mix was just to try something different. I mean, especially earlier in their career, every album brought something very unique and in stark contrast to the table. And I don't really know, admittedly, if that was a mixture of necessity or a desire to try new things. But I know at that point, I mean, how long had Jason been in the group at that point? When they were doing
Probably
the recording?
around a year or so.
About a year or so? Maybe they didn't really feel like it was going to be clean enough.
That's valid.
Maybe it was just mixed that way. It's like, oh, we'll have like the kind of the low rumble, but I riff like I mean, Hetfield's riffing carries the group single-handedly, and even when they got Trujillo, they commented that they haven't had a bassist that clean since the late and great. When you play guitar, anything for your guitar playing wise that you picked up from this album that you didn't do prior to listening to it? Admittedly, not as much as some of the others. I mean, besides just the brutal riffing, that's a workout for anybody. But I really digged some of the chord progressions. I mean, one is the obvious choice. It ended up being reused in some of Metallica's later repertoire. But on the whole, I mean, I learned some of the solos. It worked in my technique as I was starting, and I can't say it didn't develop my ear in some way that still sticks with me today. But nothing hugely landmark. Like, it's a huge snapshot memory of mine when I first got through Master of Puppets and did not get tired. That was definitely an accomplishment. I felt like I had leveled up like 7 times at least. And so I guess on that question.
That's funny. I because of that, since that album's influence, on the first 4, then how do you rank them in order?
Where do I rank them in order? This is probably a stupid answer, but I would have to say chronologically, and only because I felt like the first album was almost punkish, and that was cool, and that was very revolutionary, and I felt like it had to be done that way to really just kind of get that influence out of the way as being obvious, because at that point, fast riffing and metal were not the same thing. That was very new, and just as they grew and developed their sound and refined it up until fuck, I'm losing my head. As they developed their sound moving forward, I just liked it more and more.